in terms of hoping to be at home in the universe, my universe, as I've come to call it. So our responsive reading may be seriously outdated in implying that our home away from home is just one universe. Nevertheless, as we share this reading, I invite you to take it personally, because it's also the story of your own being and becoming. It's our story, and I'd say it's even the story of the origin and becoming of UUMH Chatham. So please remain seated and let us read responsively. It is number 530, Out of the Stars. Out of the stars in their flight, out of the dust of eternity, here have we come, stardust and sunlight mingling through time and through space.
Out of the stars have we come, up from time, out of the stars have we come.
Time out of time before time, in the vastness of space, earth spun to orbit the sun, earth with the thunder of mountains newborn, the boiling of seas.
Earth warmed by sun, lit by sunlight, this is our home, out of the stars have we come.
Mystery hidden in mystery, back through all time, mystery rising from rocks in the storm and the sea.
Out of the stars, rising from rocks in the sea, kindled by sunlight on earth, arose life.
Ponder this thing in your heart. Ponder with awe. Out of the sea to the land, out of the shallows came ferns.
Out of the sea to the land, up from darkness to light, rising to walk and to fly, out of the sea trembled life.
Ponder this thing in your heart. Life up from sea, eyes to behold, throats to sing, mates to love.
Life from the sea, warmed by sun, washed by rain, life from within, giving birth, rose to love.
This is the wonder of time. This is the marvel of space. Out of the stars swung the earth. Life upon earth rose to love.
This is the marvel of life, rising to see and to know. Out of your heart, I wonder, sing how you live.
Now to continue the first and introductory part of the sermon reflection, before a moment of meditation and the anthem. This morning, I'm trying to suggest that our lives, individually and communally, cannot be understood outside the context of what might be called the epic of cosmic evolution, the universe story. And yet, as we yearn for a sense of home in the midst of life's personal, social, and planetary uncertainty, we find in this epic of evolution both trepidation and inspiration. There's trepidation because we find ourselves as bit players in this epic, which began, according to the standard model, some 14 billion years ago. We seem a kind of last-minute speck of unique consciousness tagged on, at best estimates, a mere 2 to 6 million years ago. That is, the significance of the Anthropocene era is nothing if not uncertain. However, there's also inspiration to be found because we ourselves are both the product and among the ongoing co-creators, participants in this story of cosmic evolution, since it now includes biocultural co-evolution. That inspiration can be found in paying attention to these things in the universe story. First, it's a story, it's narration, and although it has a seeming beginning and middle, and may indeed have an end, it's not over yet. And because it's a story, almost by definition, it's a journey over time, and clearly it's a journey of finding and creating home, but over and over and over again. And if we are participants in this cosmic story, then we might expect that the characteristics that give rise to life in the cosmos also show up to give new life to our own days and years, to our journeys. The author Sam Keen, in his book To a Dancing God, put it this way: in telling stories, traditional humans were affirming the unity of reality. The individual, the tribe, nature, and the cosmos fit together in concentric circles of integrated meaning. All of the parts were necessary to form a coherent and artistic whole. It seems to me that our responsive reading suggests that this whole grand cosmic enterprise of creating home is nothing more than, and nothing less than, a story of a journey to love. Not only to be loved, but to love. When I served First Parish, Arlington, Mass. As minister, we did a lot with what we called credo services and credo circles. Although the word credo traditionally refers to a doctrine of belief required for belonging in a particular religious community, we embrace the word's etymological roots of to believe, and believe actually means to hold dear, to love. A credo may be understood as a story from your personal experience of that which you hold dear, what you love as the ultimate nature of reality. I think one of the most important ways everyone can minister and manifest love in religious community is by helping one another with our credos. They need to be nurtured, challenged, continuously updated. Sometimes a credo story is about a sudden, transforming experience. More often, it's a story that seems more like a journey, a pilgrimage over time, where you come home again and again to a growing awareness of who you are and are becoming, your unique truth, and how you are meant to be of use in the universe. Home is whenever and wherever we love life most deeply. A credo story is a story of falling in love with life and thus coming home, no matter how long that takes, no matter what may happen to oneself at the level of immediate event. This is my Native American story doll. I believe the slide might be up. The Native American clay story doll represents the oral tradition of tribal storytelling in Native American culture as a whole, but especially among the Pueblo tribes. The storyteller is sometimes considered a revered figure, since the teller uses the vehicle of story to pass on from generation to generation the spiritual values that create home on earth, in the universe, for people whose specific place at home had a history of being terrorized. Typically, in these clay figures, children are gathered around listening, and the mouth of the storyteller is open and raised so that the spirit of life, of wisdom, and love can come out. Please now take a minute in silent meditation, and if you will, ponder in your heart these things. What's the story you might tell from your personal experience and pass on about a journey you took to love, to create being and becoming at home in the universe, for yourself and for others? Home is love, but it's a journey of love. So what story might you recall? Let us share a minute of silent listening to what is within. And may the spirit of life come out in your story, in your voice.
Somebody to love. Each morning I get up, I die a little, barely stand on my feet, take a look in the mirror and cry, Lord, what you doing to me? Spend all my years believing in you, but I just can't get no relief, Lord. Somebody. Can anybody find me? Somebody to love. I work hard every day of my life. I work till I ache my bones. At the end, I take home my hard-earned pay on my own. I get down on my knees and I start to pray till the tears run down from my eyes. Lord. Somebody. Can anybody find me? Somebody to love. Ready? Can anybody find me? Somebody to love.
I am not going to be surprised if this choir takes itself on the road. All right, this is where I have to switch over. Bear with me. Michael, do I have it? Are you seeing the Native American story at all? Okay.
Good luck, Barbara.
Yeah, I really got, I'm right in front of the clock and I am not going to make 11:30. So apologies in advance. I have to say it was great fun learning how to do this, and it did lengthen things a little bit. So apologies in advance. Okay. Well, after my introductory reflections in the service, this sermon time is a bit of show and tell, with my first sermonizing PowerPoint slides, trying to share what has become a kind of spiritual practice for me and a form of ministry which I think we can all engage in case it resonates with any of you as something you already do or might consider, either individually or in community here. That is, I'm trying to exemplify, in part by a few of my own stories, that contained within some of our stories of your personal experiences may be signposts for what you, as part and co-creator of the universe, are to express as your unique truth and wisdom. What you are to be when you grow up, over and over, just like the universe. This is part of your journey of coming home to what is your best self at that time. I believe that we all can make music of one sort or another. I've learned this from Frank, yet some of us come home to making music their life's work. And I believe that we can all minister to one another, as many of you live out here, although some of us come home to it as the focus of our life's work. There's a story from my personal experience of coming home to ministry as my life's work, but it's a story of a very long journey chronologically. At this late hour of my life, perhaps it would be better to call it a book, but it has a really simple title, and that is God is Love. Now, I realize that that is a title with which many UUs would take exception. So I'll start by assuring you that though I don't have time to explain today, that I am not at all a supernaturalist in worldview, and to reassure you by quoting writer Annie Lamott in her book, Almost Everything, Notes on Hope. Here she quotes someone else who noted, "God is the worst nickname ever." A sentiment that some UUs share, I think. But there is a chapter story on my journey that accounts for the origins of how I eventually came to use the name God to name my belief that the ultimate nature of the universe is its capacity to be made new by the transforming power of love. I'll share just a few of the story chapters of this storybook about my journey to home in the life work of ministry, and hope that doing so might spark recollections and eventual telling of some of your stories. Are you seeing a church? The story began in Sunday school at Hammond Street Congregational Church in Bangor, Maine. In retrospect, it was liberal enough in its interpretation of Christianity under the influence of a wonderful minister, Ed Ernst, that it well could have been a UU church. I blame and credit the whole life storybook of God is Love on my Sunday school teachers. That is, from the time I was about 5 years old and in Sunday school, I started to be aware that I was thinking about love and at the same time thinking about my thinking about it. 2 candles? I'll call this chapter story the in-between of the 2 candles. In that era of the late 40s and early 50s, young children were not invited to come into the beginning of the Sunday service with the grown-ups, as is the custom now in our UU and other Protestant churches. Instead, we had a little ritual in the church basement of starting Sunday school by sitting in those little people chairs gathered around a little table with 2 tall white candles on it. The teacher, using a lit taper candle, would light 1 tall white candle, and then she'd say, "First, God loved us." Then, after what seemed like a very long pause to a 5-year-old, slowly she'd take a step sideways and light the other candle, saying again slowly, "And then we loved God." And another long pause before she blew out the lit taper candle while saying, "God is love." That was it, and then we were dismissed to our classes. Well, week after week, in those seemingly endless pauses the teacher made between lighting the first candle and the second candle and the pauses before she ended with "God is love," I became increasingly preoccupied with trying to figure out that love thing. That is, just how did God's love in the first candle get to us in the second candle? And then how did the love in the then we loved God, represented by the second candle, get back to God, closing the loop, so to speak? Well, to make matters worse, for a 5-year-old, what did her summation, God is love, mean? Didn't that contradict her implying that God was the first candle? Decades later, after encountering the work of the Jewish theologian Martin Buber in his book I and Thou and his concept of true meeting, I would come to say that it is precisely the in-between of those candles, the in-between of true meeting, that one experiences God as the activity of love, of coming home to one's place and reason to be in the universe, in relationship. As an adult, especially after I got into parish ministry, remembering my theological quandary as a 5-year-old, I realized that one should never, ever assume that very young kids don't try to figure out what life is about. And I suspect that that child still lingers inside most of us. The early teaching of God is love didn't happen in my home, in spite of the fact that my father was a professor and minister and then president of the very liberal Bangor Theological Seminary in Maine, where I grew up. The word God was rarely mentioned at home, at least in dialogue to which I was privy or encouraged to initiate. There was no concern about Christian doctrine, no prayer, no grace at meals, or encouragement of questions about the meaning of life. Very few books, except some of my father's from graduate school. Kindergarten class. Well, whatever that love thing was about, I do remember feeling it in my Sunday school class. Our classroom was on the stage of the large downstairs gathering hall. The apparent activity of the morning in this photo was putting different colored pegs in little pegboards to make a design, which for some reason was not something that I did easily. Although later I realized that there was love in my home, I remember not often feeling it. And maybe because of that, I sensed something different in Sunday school. And although we weren't poor, I didn't have an abundance of toys at home that encouraged exploratory fun, such as pegboards. In this old photo, a teacher is lovingly hovering over me, that's me, helping guide my hand to put each peg in the right hole to make a kind of colorful design. I loved it. Perhaps instinctively, without a formal curriculum, my congregational Sunday school kindergarten teachers knew that helping a child be able to put pegs in a pegboard to create a pretty design was one step in the direction of knowing God is love. So experiencing that God is love in a safe setting, in a way I hadn't at home, meant that I held to the name God for all my lifetime experiences, which since then have been as personally transforming for good as those in early Sunday school. And that's why I recognize that it is a loss, but a significant hope for the future that UUMH might rebirth its program for children and youth. Meanwhile, one way to offer a sense of home in the universe to any children and youth in our midst on their journey, their quest for truth and meaning, is to invite their questions and thoughts about big things and to listen and to dialogue with an open heart and mind. And often I'm reminded that the journey of experiencing home in the universe may begin even before we're born. My father grew up in a poor family where after high school he worked 10 years as a secretary for the New Haven Railroad until he was 27 to support his younger brothers and sisters getting through high school. Then in the space of 13 short years, he went to Bangor Seminary, where he earned a bachelor's degree, a divinity school degree, while serving as a student in those little churches in rural Maine that without seminary students would have no minister. This church was his first as a student, down east Maine, Robbinston on Route 1. When I visited in 2010 with my son Isaac, the membership had declined to 12. After Bangor Seminary, my father earned a master's at Bowdoin, had me while serving the local church in Yarmouth full-time. Then we moved to Huntington, Connecticut, while he earned his PhD from Yale, while also serving full-time in the Congregational Church there, and had my brother. In '48, he became a professor at the seminary where he'd been a student, and 5 years later became its president. Well, in spite of the disconnect between my father's position as a liberal minister and theological school president and his inability to offer at home a sense of love, intellectual, and spiritual exploration, his own journey from before I was born meant that I was born into a larger environment that did offer a safe haven of affection and exploration. So as an adult, my own journey to home includes compassion and appreciation, love, that in 13 years, he went from being a railroad secretary with a high school diploma to president of a liberal religious seminary, while also serving as a state senator and advocating for all those liberal justice causes that are yours and mine. So I'm grateful that his journey to find home in the universe started before I was born. It left me a legacy for my own journey. This chapter story might be called Age 11, Greeting Paul Tillich at the President's Tea. I was 11 and at my post of greeting people at the door of our home on the occasion of the President's Tea during Convocation Week at Bangor Seminary. Our home was the formal Hannibal Hamlin House, one of Lincoln's vice presidents, the seminary property designated as the residence for the president. The theologian, and this, where that little white fence is, right there was the formal front entrance. The theologian Paul Tillich had been a speaker during the week, and although at 11, I had no concept yet of his God as the ground of all being, I remember being aware that he was famous, a great mind, and European. He came through the door, stopped to shake my hand, looked me directly in the eye, and paused a long time before saying anything. When he finally spoke in his marvelous German accent, he declared, "You have inner beauty as well as outer beauty." I swooned. I'll get back to that. Well, a story I remembered after meeting Paul Tillich came from many years earlier and might be called Waiting for the School Bus. Although this photo was from when I was just 3, to me it presages that the school bus does eventually arrive, at least metaphorically. I was waiting in that rural community of Huntington, Connecticut for the school bus. I wanted books and someone to talk with about the big questions, but really about most anything. My mother, in this photo, had let me imagine that if I put on my hat, gathered 2 of the random adult books from my father's graduate work, some paper, and my little straw purse, and stood long enough on that front stoop, the school bus would come by, see me, stop, and whisk me out of there to a place where my questions about life and eagerness to learn would be warmly welcomed. Well, of course, the literal bus never came. However, I do still have the purse. In the 9 years which followed meeting Tillich, I went away to college at the age of 16 and found the congregational churches I visited completely unlike Campbell Street. But when, during my last year in college, I had an opportunity to write a paper on any thinker of my choosing for a political science course, I remembered Paul Tillich and his touching comment to me 9 years earlier. And I buried myself in the Simmons College library basement reading Systematic Theology, Volumes 1 and 2, The Courage to Be, The Dynamics of Faith, etc. When my paper was published in the school's selected essays, it was the happiest moment of my life up to that point. You see, the school bus had arrived. I applied to Union Theological Seminary in New York City, got in, excited by my new understanding of Tillich's God as the ground of all being, but I left seminary after a few months under pressure from my first husband in order to put him through graduate school. But I never lost my newfound sense of God as part of the being itself. It was the end of any culturally influenced supernaturalism that I might have absorbed from that era, and also of God as male. I just wasn't ready yet to trust an inner sense of a guiding force in my life. Many chapter stories followed on a journey of gradually becoming more and at home with my own truth. I did eventually go to Harvard Divinity School after taking the risk of a major professional change away from education, and became ordained at UU Parish Ministry by First Parish Brewster, which you see here, and the Nauset Fellowship, going on to serve our Amherst, Mass. Church. This is the chapel on Star Island out of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Parish ministry, in turn, led to a journey of what has now been over 3 decades of leadership roles in IRAS, the Institute on Religion in an Age of Science, including several times of offering the morning chapel talks in that beautiful stone building on that island. It is in IRAS that I found myself at home, both with a deeper appreciation for the wonders revealed in a scientific perspective of all life, as well as with a deeper humility for all that we may experience, but not yet know in a rational sense. That is, my journey in IRAS has led me to embrace a sense of home in these words of William James. The life of religion consists of the belief that there is an unseen order and that our supreme good lies in harmoniously adjusting ourselves thereto. And should we get too worried about not understanding the details of things like the unseen order of possible infinite universes, let's remember that it wasn't so very long ago, cosmologically speaking, that Newton's postulating that there's a drawing power in matter, that is, gravity, was at first considered beyond human comprehension. According to his memoirist, Newton said, "Why should that apple always descend perpendicularly to the ground? Why should it not go sideways or upwards, but constantly to the Earth's center? Assuredly, the reason is that Earth draws it. There must be a drawing power in matter." A radical thought at the time. Meanwhile, I've had opportunities to seek and speak the truth by which I find home in the universe in journeying to places like the Parliament of the World's Religions, once to Spain and once a few weeks ago to Chicago, which I must say felt as foreign and as far away to me as Spain did. In Spain, in 2004, Frank and our son Isaac and I followed the week at the Parliament with a week in Santiago de Compostela in the northwest corner of Spain, where we spent time with my young cousin Kate, who was in graduate school there and who is fluent in Spanish. She guided us around that city, famous for its cathedral, which originated as a shrine to the Apostle James and as a destination since the 9th century for pilgrims who journey there on foot from various locations in Europe and North Africa, most notably the route from the French side of the Pyrenees Mountains. Frank was especially hopeful about viewing at least a copy of the famous ancient manuscript, the Codex Calixtinus, which is kept in the archives of this Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela. The large volume was compiled in the 12th century, includes, among other things, detailed advice and inspiration for pilgrims to the shrine. But Frank, as a musicologist, was most interested in the Codex because it contains music thought to be the earliest printed examples of polyphony, including the first known composition for 3 voices. For various reasons, the scallop shell has become a symbol for St. James as well as for pilgrims to the cathedral, and so Frank brought his scallop tie on the trip. As we all stood on the plaza in front of and dwarfed by this cathedral, Frank asked my young cousin Kate about viewing replicas of the Codex. She grew up as a liberal Protestant in the Congregational Church, from which she is now somewhat lapsed, and is decidedly feminist in her orientation, but she replied jauntily, "I'll ask my friend the priest. Be back in 10 minutes." And 6 feet tall, gorgeous Kate dashed away, disappearing into this massively impressive structure. When she returned 10 minutes later, she said, "He'll meet you in the restricted archives at 10 tomorrow morning to view the actual Codex." So the next morning, our little family group, Frank with his scallop shell tie on, did indeed get to, almost casually, leaf through that ancient manuscript, including those musical sections, with 2 young priests offering helpful insights and understanding. But for me, what followed in this story of our viewing the Codex had much more to do with that year's Parliament theme about the importance of hope being an essential pathway to peace. That is, as we finished gingerly leafing through the Codex, one of the priests asked if we'd be interested in seeing the records of the conversos. He explained that these were the Jews in that area who, in the 15th century, under the Spanish Inquisition, chose to sign their names away as converts to Catholicism. They, like all Jews on the Iberian Peninsula at the time, were forced either to leave the country or convert to Catholicism or be imprisoned, tortured, and executed. Well, I turned around and saw behind me a chest-high, long tabletop bookcase, as in this picture. This is a picture of the archives, not that I took at the time, but from a book. On its lengthy 2 large shelves were kept large tomes, perhaps 50 of them. I pulled out just one of these heavy books and opened it on the table. There, in just 1 volume, as I leafed through it, was name after name after name, page after page, perhaps each volume filled with a few hundred pages, names on both sides of every page. Who can count the names of these devout Jewish souls who sacrificed their religion, their dignity, and their honor to survive? But of course, being under the watchful eye of the Inquisition, many lapsed into tiny giveaway acts that revealed their sacred identity as a Jew and lost their lives anyway. Whenever I recall those signatures of the conversos, I choke up. This was a Holocaust resulting from an authoritarianism not unlike what the parliament I went to just a few weeks ago in Chicago named as the most dangerous crisis still facing our world today, centuries later: authoritarianism. And yet we must hold dear, believe in, the perspective that Bill Lesher, as Parliament Chair in 2004, offered. He said, hope has to do with how you live, regardless of the situation, often in spite of the current circumstances. It has to do with pursuing what will bring about peace, no matter how long it takes, even centuries. No matter how long it takes, is it possible for us to trust that our journeys of home not only begin before birth, but continue after death? I don't know, of course, if that's so, but it is what I have experienced and have another catalog of stories about those experiences. Perhaps my heart recognized those experiences as truth for my journey because my head first recognized their truth for me when I heard the words of my professor, again, Wilfred Cantwell Smith, who said, "Life and death are not opposites. Birth and death are opposites, and they are both part of life." Our journey of home, does it continue after death? In the words of William Wordsworth, our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting, the soul that rises with us. Our life's star hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar, not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home.
We have come to the time in the service. Thank you, Barbara, for getting us this far. Thank you. When we have an opportunity to give from our abundance, to share in the ministry of the Meeting House by supporting its work in the world and acknowledging its meaning in our lives. You can give in all of the usual ways, which you all know, by check, cash at the back, when we move past the offering baskets, cash or checks. And online in our website, you can find a button to push that you can donate to any of the various things that we are collecting for, like the grandmothers for gun control. Wrong. The grandmothers against gun violence. They changed their name appropriately. In any case, you can also mail a check to the office or online or whatever. Just know that your generosity is welcomed and appreciated by all of us. It's how we get to tell our story, really, when it comes down to it. Without that reality, we couldn't be here now. And now the offering will be gratefully received.
Please join me in the spirit of a moment of closing prayer. Words of a prayer of thanks from Alice Walker. There is no doubt in my mind that I am blessed, that you are present in the cosmos and in me, and that we are breathing together. I thank you for your gifts. I see you are trying to teach me all the time. I love you. And prayerful words of hopeful going forth from Sam Keen. In telling our stories, we may have confidence that our warm, concrete, dramatic images are not unrelated to the forces that make for the unity of the macrocosm. If you or I have a story about our journey of home, for God's sake, for our own and the world's sake, may we tell it. Amen. Please rise in body and spirit and join in singing hymn number 205, Amazing Grace, and then remain standing for extinguishing the chalice and benediction. Benediction, which I believe you have on the slide, is one that I composed in Amherst that we used each week at First Parish Arlington. Please, let's join together. May faith in the spirit of life, hope for the community of earth, and love of the sacred in one another be ours now and in all the days to come. So be it. Please be seated for the postlude.